Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program this evening, the major breakthrough in Indo-US relations with the announcement of a new trade deal between India and the United States. Just yesterday, the US President Donald Trump revealed on Truth Social that after a call with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the two nations have agreed to a pact slashing US tariffs on Indian goods from as high as 50% down to 18%. This gives Indian exports, think textiles, gems, machinery and more, a sharp competitive edge over rivals like China, Pakistan and Bangladesh in the massive American market. Now, in exchange, India has committed to halting purchases of Russian oil, ramping up buys of American energy, coal tech, defense equipment and some farm products. Now, India will also reduce its tariffs on US industrial goods to zero from around 13.5%, opening doors for cheaper imports of tech, pharmaceuticals, possibly aircraft. Now, markets have reacted positively. Indian stock market surged, the rupee strengthened. Experts have seen this as a boost to exports, jobs in labor-intensive sectors, and overall economic growth. Now, geopolitically, it resets strained ties and deepens strategic cooperation amidst global shifts. The Prime Minister has welcomed it as a win for Made in India products, while the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal hailed it as the best deal India has received compared to our neighbours. He's firmly assured people in the country that India's core interests, farmers, the dairy sector will remain fully protected. No compromises there, is what he said.
जो ट्रेड डील यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका के साथ फाइनलाइज की है वो हमारे सभी पड़ोसी, सभी आसपास के देश, सभी जो देश हमारे साथ स्पर्धा करते हैं, उन सभी देशों में सबसे बढ़िया डील भारत को मिली है। आप सबको, हम सबको मिली है, जो देशवासियों के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए शुभ संकेत लाती है।
Well, joining us now, a very special guest, Nirupama Rao, former Foreign Secretary of India, somebody who's looked very closely, obviously, professionally and otherwise, at the relationship between India and the United States. Thanks, ma'am, very much for being with us. Do you believe that the trade deal with America is premised on India moving away from Russian oil imports and potentially moving to oil imports from, let's say, Venezuela?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Vishnu. First of all, let me say that the announcement that a trade deal has been arrived at between the two countries is certainly a welcome development after many months of tension in the bilateral relationship on account of the trade issue. Having said that, to answer your question on the Russian oil imports, of course, I haven't read the fine print on this, but clearly some assurance has been conveyed to the Americans, to the US side, that we will be obviously reducing Russian oil imports, perhaps putting an end to them. Over a period of time, perhaps, there obviously must have been some kind of time trajectory charted out, but clearly some kind of assurance has been given. And whether this is a kind of binary switch, as some have said, that India will now buy Venezuelan oil instead of Russian oil. It's not so simple as that. When you import oil or energy from any country, you're obviously looking at price, you're looking at logistics, you're looking at the sanctions regime, you're looking at the refinery capability to refine that kind of oil. So there are many, many issues to be addressed in this. So it's not a simple case of Russian oil out and Venezuelan oil in. But clearly, we are going to be diversifying our imports of energy, and obviously there will be a larger quantum, a volume of imports, energy imports from the United States, which is clearly of advantage to the Americans.
And do you believe that this announcement of the trade deal itself puts an end to this period of uncertainty that we've seen in this relationship since, let's say, tariffs were announced by the United States? Is the relationship back on an even keel?
Well, the uncertainty has certainly lifted to some extent. I wouldn't say it has gone away entirely. Because, the larger issue that we have to look at here is whether trade policy is now going to continue to be used as a leverage for strategic objectives by the United States. And that, I think, perforce tells us that this veil that has been lifted now obviously has eased the situation somewhat, but whether it spells the lifting of uncertainty entirely when it comes to this issue is difficult to say at the moment, because whether this is a final settlement, it's too early to say. Tariffs have been eased, no doubt. They have been eased, and the sentiment has stabilized, and that is certainly a salutary development. But we need to see the formal schedules, we need to see the compliance procedures, we need to see the implementation mechanisms. So the uncertainty has not gone away entirely, I would say.
Has the broader strategic relationship, therefore, between Delhi and Washington been reduced to being essentially transactional? An equation pegged primarily to trade and deals?
Well, trade has certainly been used. It's become a larger issue as far as the whole spectrum of the relationship is concerned. But you mustn't forget that the larger India-US relationship is factored on a number of aspects, and particularly defense and technology, as well as people-to-people ties, people-centered relations. So that is the larger picture, which both sides cannot afford to lose sight of. But having said that, the fact that trade has reared its head in terms of the US seeking leverage on that issue for its own strategic objectives is not something we can put aside easily. So the experience of the last few months, I think, will leave some scar tissue in the relationship.
And ma'am, what you are talking about now, about the premise or the basis of the relationship, do you sense that that in itself has changed? Because we've got Pakistan with a much closer relationship now with the United States. We've seen India trying to improve our ties with China. So therefore, that fundamental link between Washington and New Delhi with concerns over China, for example, that's taken a new shape now, I would suggest.
Again, I think it's too early to draw definitive conclusions from all that has happened. As far as the India-US relationship is concerned, I think our interests, US-India strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, whether it comes to the relationships with China, whether it comes to the evolving situation concerning our region, I think there are many, many commonalities in the views we share between India and the United States. So this is really not a time to conclude that somehow things have so radically changed in the relationship that things will never be the same again. So that, I think, would not be the recommended conclusion for me, at least at this point of time. I, as an observer of this relationship, would suggest to your audience that we need to wait, to watch, to observe, learn the lessons that we've learned over the last few months, but have faith in the structure, the substance, and the validity of this relationship. And I don't think the United States and its representatives differ from us on that front.
And ma'am, a final question. We've had two major trade deals within days. I mean, who would have thought that would take place? The EU and the United States. Of course, the EU deal has taken, 19 odd years to get done. So if we complain about the America deal taking too much time, in fact, it hasn't. But I think the larger point is the significance of India having diverse trading partners. In this very uncertain world, how important is that for us geostrategically, geopolitically?
It is extremely important and obviously very, very relevant. Diversification is the name of the game. And when you talk of strategic autonomy that India exercises, this is essentially the exercise of that sovereign strategic autonomy, which has been the hallmark of the relations that we have had with the rest of the world. And especially today, as the world order literally, in many senses, is dissolving, is disintegrating, is somehow changing before our very eyes. I'm reminded of those lines that things are falling apart and will never be the same again, and that the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. I remember the words of Yeats, and I think that is a situation that we will have to factor into our calculations. And for that reason alone, I think diversification is absolutely called for in this evolving situation. And the trade deal with the EU very much falls into that definition of how we view the world. So with the EU, with the US, we've had trade deals now with Oman, with the UK, with New Zealand. And I think that is essentially the path that India should follow in the exercise of its strategic autonomy and in the defense of the national interest.
All right, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us, telling us a little bit about the importance of this trade deal, what it means and how it factors into the broader relationship between both sides. Well, joining us now, a very special guest, Ambassador Atul Keshap has been a diplomat here in India. He is now president of the US-India Business Council, someone who clearly welcomes this deal. We've spoken about it for quite some time. At a certain stage, it didn't seem it was happening anytime soon, but it has. Your first reaction?
Well, utter and complete joy, Vishnu. I'm delighted that the two governments have come to an agreement. I think it's going to be good for both of us.
What is your understanding of the deal's exact scope? Does it, for example, cover specific areas, agriculture, energy, defense, tech, non-tariff barriers, or market access commitments? And, in a sense, what timeline do you anticipate for the ratification?
Well, Vishnu, right now we're looking at a series of social media statements that have come out by both leaders and by other officials in both governments. So the details are a little bit thin, but I think what's going to happen in the days to come is that both governments will release some form of joint statement that gives more details. There may be something like a Federal Register notice in the United States that gives, quite some detail to the various importers, and that similar sort of process may happen in India. I imagine that will take a few more days. So I think in the week to come, we'll probably get quite a bit more detail about what this entails. But what's clear is that some sort of landmark agreement has been struck between the two leaders, in which there will be a very substantial reduction in tariffs in both directions, which is really going to create an enormous boost for trade in both directions. And both leaders have cited the $500 billion goal. So I'm quite optimistic that in things like agriculture, energy, technology, including chips, and capital equipment and much else besides, we're going to see quite a bit of impetus and boost in U.S.-India trade relations, which then sets the table very nicely for the next phase of the trade negotiations, which is in services, where our two countries lead the entire world.
So President Trump has stated that India has agreed to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers on U.S. goods to zero and commit to purchasing, as you mentioned, $500 billion in American products, including presumably petroleum, defense, agriculture, alongside shifting away from Russian oil imports. From the U.S. business perspective, how realistic and enforceable are these commitments? And, in your mind, which specific sectors or products stand to gain the most from increased access to Indian markets?
Well, first of all, there's the old adage, trade follows the flag. I think that's true in India as well. And what we've seen is an enormous signal by both leaders, the very tops of their governments, indicating renewed faith in each other, a desire to grow the economic and strategic and technological relationship. So I think business in both countries will respond very favorably. Look, business craves predictability. USIBC is a 50-year-old institution comprised of the leading companies in America and India. And when you're going to make a multi-billion-dollar decision over a period of time as much as 10, 20, 30 years, you want predictability. What this deal does is it offers that measure of predictability and renewed confidence in one another that I think will unleash all sorts of positive momentum. You mentioned oil and gas. Certainly America is a superpower in oil and gas production, but then there's also technology in so many different ways. India is hosting the AI summit in a few days. There's quantum computing, there's semiconductors, there's so much that can unfold from this because the governments have sent a powerful psychological signal.
So the deal appears to be tied to broader strategic shifts, including energy sourcing away from Russia. Do you see, significant Indian oil imports from Venezuela as an alternative?
Well, there's been some discussion that this has been offered. And, we've talked about this in the past where there has been very productive discussion between Washington and Delhi in 2008 and 2010 about Iranian oil. I think that same sort of discussion has been happening. It's been happening behind closed doors. It clearly has been constructive. And if you, read between the tea leaves, it would seem that some Venezuelan oil has been offered.
And so that's certainly something that we'd have to keep an eye out on. But we just signed a free trade agreement with the EU. I mean, you don't get two massive trade deals happening within, let's say, a week anywhere in the world. I don't know if it's ever happened anywhere else. How do you see this agreement strengthening the overall US-India strategic partnership? And would you agree from an Indian standpoint, we've got diverse sources. So if things don't necessarily go the way that we want them to with, say, America, there's always the EU to rely on and vice versa.
Well, I'm old-fashioned and I cling to the old ways, and I love it when great democracies collaborate and come up with friendly agreements. So I applaud India for the great work it's done to sew up all of these free trade agreements. This is a very new face of India compared to the 1970s with import substitution. And so it's great to see India blossom in world affairs and to see the Indian economy grow as strongly as it is and to see India be as confident about settling and finalizing these trade agreements with the EU, with the US, with others. It is a marvel to behold. And I really applaud the Indian system, leadership for what they're doing. And I applaud the United States for rallying and concluding this deal. I think Ambassador Gore should be very proud that in just days after his arrival in India, he has achieved a massive outcome for his country that is going to be beneficial for both of our countries. So I see this as all positive momentum, Vishnu. And yes, it's good to have options in life. And yes, it's good to have friends. And India clearly has shown in the past year that it has both.
Final question, is the relationship back on an even keel? Let's accept the fact that it's not been on an even keel for some time.
So this is an era of great geostrategic and geoeconomic uncertainty. I think it's clear that the great democracies realize they have to rely on one another. We have to ensure resilient supply chains for our people. We have to look at things like APIs for pharmaceuticals, semiconductor supply chains, critical mineral supply chains, the nuclear renaissance. All of these things have to happen with the great democracies working in concert. And as I said, I cling to the old religion that the free and great open democracies need to work with one another. So I think what happens now is that as a result of this deal being struck, a pause button that was hit between both systems while waiting for this negotiation will now switch to a play button. Because in the world I used to occupy in government, when a negotiation is ongoing, every single other matter gets almost held in abeyance while you're waiting for the overall negotiation to be struck. Now that that has been done, I see a lot of positive momentum on Quad and on all the other areas that I just mentioned. I think the U.S. and India will go forward to even greater strengths.
All right, Ambassador Keshap, thanks very much for being with us. Finally, we've got that deal, and Ambassador Gore was telling me yesterday in an interview that perhaps in the next couple of months we may even see Donald Trump over here. At the very least, we'll see the two leaders meet. So let's look forward to that. Thanks very much, sir, for being with us.